So, Rust and Bone, Marion Cotillard, Matthias Schoenhust, is that right?
Matthias Schoenhust.
Nigel's been practicing that all week.
I've been practicing it all week. I even watched a video on YouTube in which Marion Cotillard pronounced his name several times purely for my benefit, it seemed to me at the time.
What do we think of the film, gentlemen?
It's a love story, but not as we know it. It's an extraordinary tale, really. People who are familiar with Jacques Audiard's work will know that he's a man for whom realism and stylization are two facets of the same thing. He says something in an interesting interview in The Guardian this week. He says, if it's too realistic, it's boring. If it's too stylized, you don't believe it. But keeping those two things in balance in a film like this is very difficult. So here's the setup. There's a working class guy, he's got no job. He's suddenly lumbered with his 5-year-old son, whom he barely knows, but his wife apparently has taken to drugs and is no longer able to look after him. Moves into his sister's house in the south of France, Antibes, knows nobody there, is drifting around, experiences a fight outside a bar at which he meets the Marion Cotillard character, who works at Marineland and trains these orca whales. They have a kind of a flirtation, but there's nothing really going on. At this point in the film, she's very shut down, locked away. She's having none of it. He gets involved in this illegal prize fighting game, very, very vicious things that take place on sort of bits of waste ground. She has an accident, which we can't talk too much about, which makes her extremely vulnerable. Ironically, he then steps up and becomes a friend to her, but at the beginning in a very, very tentative way. He doesn't really want to commit himself to it. So you've got this kind of balance of emotions, and this Audiard talks about this thing called rolling thunder, a kind of simmering erotic tension, like the distant thunder that's waiting to break, and then when it breaks it's going to be really something, and when it does, it is really something.
I absolutely loved 90% of this film, and I have the same problem, funnily enough, I have with The Master, even more so in this, because actually, I mean, these are two. It's a good week. I mean, if you live in London, lucky enough to be able to see The Master, then I'm sure people will flock to it, because it's even if you don't like it, it's done a fascinating, unique piece of filmmaking. This is as well, and it's a unique love story, completely believable. So I thought it was very interesting, that quote that Nigel read out, because I think the brilliant way he tells this unbelievable thing that happens to Marion Cotillard's character is done so effectively, and in a very non-melodramatic way. The realism is extraordinary, and yet he finds incredible poetry and romanticism in it as well. And I actually find a lot of films that have, bare knuckle boxes and incredibly off-putting. I mean, this guy is a very macho, ridiculous man, reveling in his masculinity. His treatment of his poor little boy is awful. It's absolutely awful. And that little kid is fantastic and adorable in it. But it's always believable. And then he finds the redemption in this relationship, this extraordinary relationship with Marion Cotillard's character. And I thought it was stunningly convincing and unique. But the ending is melodramatic, and funny enough, all the way through he's avoiding melodrama, and yet suddenly something happens, and I just didn't buy that thing. I found
this film utterly beguiling. I loved it, and the performances were fascinating, and the way in which, halfway through the movie, she works with the whales, with these killer whales, the orcas, and halfway through the film, I'm thinking, well, he's just another killer whale, the male character. He's just another blind force of nature that crashes around, unaware of the consequences of what he's doing. It's just his nature. And then the film unpeels him, and they connect, and it's beautifully done.
Absolutely.
And the end is melodramatic. It's as if they press the melodrama eject button, for instance. If there were an ejector seat, perhaps in a vehicle of some kind, they press the ejector seat and they fire themselves into a melodramatic film, which has a montage scene to end, to tie the ends up, and it's still worth seeing. I mean, despite this kind of
it's totally worth seeing. It's 90% from a brilliant film, and one of my favourite films of the year in many ways. But I just wish they'd stopped it 10 minutes. And
the CGI in it for telling the story, not for blowing your head off and all that sort of thing.